Cardiologist says police, not drug overdose, killed George Floyd. Yet another medical expert in the Derek Chauvin trial has testified that George Floyd didn't die because of a fentanyl overdose or pre-existing heart problems. Instead, according to cardiologist Dr. Jonathan Rich, an expert witness called by the state, Mr. Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck for minutes, along with other police restraints, triggered a cardiopulmonary arrest that killed him. He was trying to get enough oxygen, and because he was unable to because of the position that he was subjected to, the heart didn't have enough oxygen either, which means the entire body is deprived of oxygen. Mr. Chauvin, a former Minneapolis police officer, is on trial for murder after he knelt for more than 9 minutes on the neck of Mr. Floyd, an unarmed black man, during an arrest for a $20 bill. Dr. Rich also argued against some of the defense's main conclusions, that fentanyl abuse and Mr. Floyd's underlying heart problems caused the death. I can state with a high level of medical certainty that George Floyd did not die from a primary heart event, and he did not die from a drug overdose, Mr. Rich said. The cardiologist said both an inspection of Mr. Floyd's autopsy and medical record, as well as his prolonged death, suggested a sudden heart attack was not to blame. Meanwhile, Mr. Floyd's alertness and clear speech throughout his encounter with police helped rule out a fentanyl-related overdose, since victims usually appear woozy and have slurred words. All told, the combined factors lead Mr. Rich to believe Mr. Floyd would still be alive were it not for police. I believe that Mr. George Floyd's death was absolutely preventable, he said. There was one moment in the video where I heard one of the officers say, "I think he's passing out." That would have been an opportunity to quickly remove him from that position of not getting enough oxygen, perhaps turn him into a recovery position, and allow him to start to expand his lungs again and bring in oxygen. Defense attorney Eric Nelson, meanwhile, argued that the police restraint would have been prevented if Mr. Floyd had originally gotten into the police car as officers requested. So if he'd gotten into the squad car he would have survived? Mr. Nelson asked Mr. Rich. That was the prevailing opinion of a number of medical experts who testified last week. On Friday, Dr. Andrew Baker, the county medical examiner who conducted Mr. Floyd's autopsy, said police ultimately caused his death, putting more strain on the body than Mr. Floyd's already somewhat diseased heart could talk. Mr. Floyd's use of fentanyl did not cause the subdual or neck restraint, Mr. Baker said. His heart disease did not cause the subdual or the neck restraint. The day before, Dr. Bill Smock, a forensic medical specialist and police training doctor, said much the same thing. Mr. Floyd died of positional asphyxia, which is a fancy way of saying he died because he had no oxygen in his body. When the body is deprived of oxygen, in this case from pressure on his chest and back, he gradually succumbed to lower and lower levels of oxygen until it was gone and he died. Dr. Maton Tobin, a lung expert, testified earlier in the week that according to his calculations, Mr. Floyd had at least 90 pounds of pressure along on his neck, and the combined weight of 3 police officers restraining him on the hard pavement was like his lungs were in a vice. The defense, meanwhile, has argued that Mr. Floyd was at potentially fatal risk long before he encountered police. The evidence will show that Mr. Floyd died of a cardiac arrhythmia that occurred as a result of hypertension, his coronary disease, the ingestion of methamphetamine and fentanyl, and the adrenaline flowing through his body, all of which acted to further compromise an already compromised heart, Mr. Nelson said during opening arguments in the trial.
Don't forget to subscribe 9plus International.